What's up, guys? Illuminostic, and we are getting back into Outlaw Tales, which is basically my biographical series. People have asked a few times. Basically all these stories from my channel I've offered as anecdotes to support ideas and concepts and to elucidate stuff, but there's not really any chronology, so the series is basically everything in chronological order with the story to kind of put it all in perspective. And so we have kind of entered into the period in my life where actually a lot of the material for this channel was drawn from. It's a period that I refer to as the Phoenix Process period, and it was a time of rapid evolution and development, and also a lot of experiences of synchronicity and other sort of parapsychological phenomena. It was really intense, and being a skeptic and a person that prides themselves on, very thorough critical thinking, I'm actually surprised at how difficult it has been for me to sort of assimilate the things that I experienced, and I certainly don't have full explanations for all of it yet, especially the last part of the last segment of this series. I was talking about this apparent alien contact experience that my girlfriend and I had, and then the next day I ran into all these different people that described these beings the same way, and none of them knew each other, which really lended a lot of credibility to the experience. I might have been able to dismiss it and write it off if it wasn't for the fact that 5 different people the next day also, described having similar experiences. And it gets even weirder than that, really, because several of us actually received the same messages during these encounters, and that's also really interesting. But I wanted to take a second to point out that obviously it's not lost on me that the idea that space aliens would travel all the way to Earth just to harass like me and my pot grower friend and the ex-gangbanger and my girlfriend, and it's clearly ridiculous. So I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it's possible that they were like holograms, projections from our future self, as Terence McKenna suggested. They could be some kind of manifestation of the collective unconscious. All I know for certain is that the events happened as I described them. I really don't have an explanation beyond that. There are a couple of elements of it that are also interesting to me, like the fact that if you look throughout the history of like fairy folklore, these kind of weird experiences of strange coincidences and sort of reality bending sort of stuff oftentimes precedes contact with these like fairy folk and gnomes and whatnot. So, I'm kind of at this point in my life leading to the explanation that there is some sort of manifestation of the collective mind or the universal mind that presents itself in this way, and I experience that. And I can only assume that the reason that all of these people that were connected to me also shared this experience was that I may not have taken it seriously otherwise. And of course, the general gist of the message was that these higher beings, whether they're space aliens or interdimensionals or whatever, they cannot intervene in the development of a race on a planet until the absolute last moment when they're on the verge of destroying themselves. And so that, obviously I think it's interesting that we seem to be on the verge of destroying ourselves, and there are a lot of indications that, so that's where we left off in the story, and I just wanted to offer that caveat that, I'm not saying that they were literally space aliens, but again, it's impossible for me to dismiss the experience after having ran into all these people the next day that all described them as being translucent, about 4 feet tall, gray, big black eyes, just like the traditional gray alien. And then about a year later, when I went to see the ex-gangbanger guy, when I walked in his apartment, he just started going off about what he had received in regards to the plan, I guess, of these beings. And I stopped him at one point and I said, so wait, are you telling me when you saw this being on the roof that it telepathically told you all this? And he's like, no. I just knew all this stuff. And it was pretty much word for word. Like if I had written it down, it would have matched his account. So, I don't know what to say about that. And of course, if you guys have been following the story, if you put that experience in the context of everything else that was happening, it was really, quite a lot to process. Still to this day, I'm kind of working through this mystery, obviously, and making progress still, coming up with insights and sort of watching the story unfold as we speak. So let's see here. So I guess after the experience with these, whatever they were, interdimensionals, let's say, I had a series of really, really compelling synchronicities, and they often left physical traces. So there was no way to discount them and say, oh, we must have imagined that, or, I've just lost my mind. Like the ruler with 2 11s on it was still there every day. The bear claws that fell out of the insulation. When I got the phone call about my girlfriend taking pictures of bear in the front yard, hung up and pulled this insulation out, bear claws fall out. You know what I mean? They're still there. So, and also a lot of this stuff happened with a lot of witnesses, which is kind of unusual, I think. Also, if you guys watched my stream about channeling, that experience with Joe, where I knew the name of the girl that set up his brother to get killed. I knew the name of their dog. I knew my mom lied to me about my namesake, how he died, and I knew the name of the guy that provoked him to, or the guy that his girlfriend cheated on that provoked him to commit suicide. I knew the name. I said, what does Steve Miller have to do with this, So there were all these crazy, otherworldly, sort of parapsychological phenomena occurring in aggregate, day in, day out, all day long. And so I thought, okay, so the next step in all of this is that I need to be able to do this deliberately. I have to, actually, I'm going to tell you guys one more story before we move on from this, because I think this was about a week after the experience with the interdimensionals. During this period, I had this voice that would dictate, like it dictated to me the name of the guy. It was like in my ear saying, ask your mom about Steve Miller. And so one day it told me, you got to go out and do this ritual to the sun. And I thought, I don't really believe in magic. I don't really know any rituals, but I'll play along. And I started to walk out to there's this big field, and there's a giant rock in it. And it's facing a cave where the Anasazi drew spirals on the ceiling and like guys on horses and stuff. And it was a really magical place. There's waterfalls everywhere and really, really tremendous. And so I start walking out there, and I decide I'm not going to do it. I'm like, this is stupid. I'm going home. I go to pivot on my heel to go back to the house, and my phone beeps, and it's a message from the guy that would become the singer in Shotgun Jesus. I didn't notice that at the time. I didn't know who it was from. It said, you and your brothers will echo this gospel to the 4 corners of the globe, and yet the sun shines on, right? And so this is a solar ritual. I know that, and the sun is going down. So the message is so clearly connected to what is actually happening that I could not interpret it as anything but a message from the universal mind or whatever was behind all of this stuff. So I go out to the rock, and I sit on the rock, and I'm facing the sun. It's going down behind the mesa, behind the Anasazi cave, and I'm like, okay, so what do I do? And the voice says, raise the energy. And I'm like, well, what the hell does that even mean? And the response was something like, don't play stupid, just do it. And so I set Indian style and focused on just kind of trying to raise the energy, just intuitively kind of feeling what that must be. And after about 15 seconds of doing that, all of the rattlesnakes in the entire field suddenly are all... And then it hit me that like something is actually happening here. This is not like my imagination, there's something's actually happening. And so I'm like, what now? and the voice says, "What is your name backwards?" And I'm like, "Harley Yell Ra?" And I'm like, okay, so yell the name of the Egyptian sun god at the sun. Like, somehow that makes sense. So okay, looks like we're good. So the next day I'm driving to work, and I see the newspaper says the biggest solar storm in 26,000 years had occurred at the time that I was doing that ritual. So that also told me that whatever that voice was knew that was happening. You know, I never thought that I caused it or anything. But, you know, I know a lot of you guys have heard that before, but for those of you that haven't, I'm just trying to put some perspective on how crazy this was all getting. And so I think around that time, I realized the next step in this is to be able to do this deliberately. Also, by the way, if you haven't seen my Mastering Fear video, there was a sequence where every night I would go out at midnight, I would put on this smoking jacket I ordered from Macy's, and I would go out in the desert and face a different fear. And the culmination of that was absolutely incredible. I mean, it was the most ridiculously insane thing. I was up there with all the rest of this stuff. But so I thought I needed to do this deliberately. And I had been a big fan of Tool for a long time. And this particular vein of occult studies that I'd kind of stumbled into, Aleister Crowley was a very significant influence during this period in a lot of really weird ways. And so I knew that Danny Carey was a rock star with millions and millions of dollars and huge connections. And he was also into this same, you know, strain of occult studies. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to get in my car and drive directly to Danny Carey and have a conversation with him. I'm not going to look for him. I'm not going to get online and see where he is. I'm just going to use my mind to go and talk to this dude. And so I told some friends, because I wanted to have witnesses and make sure that people knew what I was doing and that I could have some verification. And when I went to leave, my girlfriend, actually, I was going to leave her there, but she came and like spider monkeyed me, and I actually had to walk to the car with her like wrapped around one leg, kind of like dragging her, you know. So ultimately, she ended up coming with us. We got stuck in Vegas for 3 days, and we got the money we needed to keep going just in time to arrive at the Baked Potato almost as Danny Carey was walking in the back door. So I've told this story on the channel before. We don't need to get into all the details, but the point is that I told, you know, the singer of my band, and obviously I brought my girlfriend with me, and you know, some other people, the girl who we call Marissa when I tell these stories to avoid using her actual name, was also aware of what was happening. So I went and did that, and then I was kind of like, okay, so like how much more proof do you need? So what is it that you're going to do now? And what I wanted to do was start a band in order to kind of spread this consciousness that I felt was such a necessity to sort of, you know, redirect the trajectory of mankind. You know, not that I had some delusion of like doing this single-handedly, but contributing to it. I figured there's got to be a movement coagulating, and you know, that's always been, like Timothy Leary called the musicians from the 60s the high priests of the generation, because they're really the ones that are sort of directing the current of consciousness and determining what are we having some lagging problems or something? I notice I'm plugged directly into I wonder if someone unplugged me. Let me know, you guys, in the comments if there are lagging issues or something, because I'm noticing we had like 20 folks and it just dropped right down to 7. And I don't know if am I boring or are we lagging? Okay, so that happened, and yeah, so I was saying, you know, I need to do something with this. And we go back to Colorado, and I rented this big house, and I don't know how I met these people, but I know they wanted to like grow pot. And so we were talking about that in my living room one time, and they mentioned they had a son that played drums. And it was really important for me to have musicians with a certain type of skill set. Like they needed to understand certain things, you know, about certain styles of music. And it's a very specialized skill set, right? Now it would be more common for musicians to understand the influences I was trying to combine, but at that time it was a little bit less likely. These things really hadn't started to merge yet. And so it turned out that this kid was like Wednesday, and I was like, no, there's no way you're gonna do that, but whatever. So I go back and he has it down note for note. Then I discover that the singer, or that my best friend at work, was an amazing singer. Like he had never sung professionally or done anything, but then he just asked me one time, hey, can I come to band practice? And he just blew the roof off. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And then it turned out that this drummer kid had a bass player buddy. The bass player would get up 2 hours before he went to high school. These kids, you know, they were 15 and 17 or something. And the kid would get up at 5:30 in the morning and start practicing bass, and then do that, you know, until he had to go to school. And then they were in like 5 bands together, jazz band, classic rock band, eventually my band, all this stuff. So, and then also on top of that, this kid's parents were partners in the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA. So he had, you know, like top tier Los Angeles connections. They actually, one of their other bands had just gone out and played the Whiskey. So, you know, if you guys are following this, basically, I started to notice that we had capacities of consciousness that could do stuff that is a bit surprising, you know, a bit beyond the pale, and sort of challenged the mainstream conception of what consciousness can do and what reality is and all of that sort of thing. And so the second I realized I need to do something deliberately with this, okay, I need to form this band, I realized that all of the people I need, exactly the people I need, are all around me already. And so I'm like, okay, something seems to have worked all this out before I even am, you know, it's not really me. So at this point I'm going like, I don't really know if I'm willing this or not. It's more like it's just like this symmetry that exists in the universe or something. At least that's how I think about it now. I don't know what I was thinking then, really. I was just blown away that this was happening. So then I decided I needed to step it up a level, you know, and really be highly specific. And I thought, okay, well, what am I missing here? And I'm laying in bed and I'm like, well, I'm newly single. How about and you know, I was younger, so I was like 22-year-old blonde, from a wealthy family that's willing to throw money at my music. Can we do that? And within 2 weeks, there was a doctor's daughter living in my house, 22 years old, blonde hair, and her mom eventually dead ass asked me, do you want me to give you $10,000 for your music project or to grow marijuana? And like a fool, of course, I chose to grow marijuana, which we'll get into that later. And, you know, eventually we are going to get through all of this crazy mysticalness and back into the outlaw stuff. But so, you know what I mean? And there were so many instances of this kind of thing. And you got to remember, too, that the thing with Danny Carey and then coming back and realizing the band was all around me and then, like, telling the universe, like, ordering a bride almost like from a catalog. And then the exact, I mean, it was just, you know, it actually did my head in a little bit because I started to think that I could probably just manifest anything that I wanted at any time. And that eventually caused some problems. That mentality actually would lead to me firing this band one day, which is still to this day, I think, probably the single biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. Incredibly bad. Because, you know, we started going out and playing, and we started getting exactly the feedback that I was hoping to hear. You know, I remember at one show, this older guy came up to me and he said, I haven't seen anything like that since Garcia in '74, and it didn't really click in my head at the time that he was like comparing me to my hero at his peak. I just kind of like thought he was being nice or something. But then after a while, we started getting a lot of that kind of feedback, a lot of attention from girls and stuff, and it really became apparent that something was happening. But because I had apparently developed the capacity to just manifest things that I thought, my ego started to blow up. And at one gig, I had been working in the high Rockies, and I was completely exhausted. It was a hard job. We were actually closing mine shafts way up in the peak of the Rockies, so we'd have to take these concrete bags and load them on our shoulders and like hike up to the peaks and pour them into and then throw rocks, like huge rocks, and then pour more concrete. And then bring steel beams in with helicopters, and the helicopter would dangle them, and we'd all have to run in and like hold them. And so I'd been doing that 14 hours, and I almost called into work, but I didn't. And so to try to compensate for the fact that I was so tired, I ate a handful of mushrooms and probably some other things, and that was not helpful in the end. And I guess it turned out that the singer was trying to leverage the band so he could kind of take over. I didn't really realize that yet. And so I told him what I did, and he told the kids that were very anti-drug, and they called me out at my house, and I just fired them. I was like, pack your shit up and get out of my house then. Because I thought I manifested them, I will just manifest another one. And so instead of that happening, I dropped a rock on my middle finger here at work a couple days later, tore the end of it off, couldn't play guitar for almost a year. So the universe, actually it was my fret hand, it was this finger. The universe immediately, the karma or the blowback from that was almost instantaneous, and pretty brutal. And it really derailed my life, I guess, dreams maybe even, probably, really. So let that be a warning to you guys out there that are dabbling in the occult and magic and whatnot, that, I thought I was prepared for, I knew that you had to watch out for ego inflation. But man, these things are the devil, and they're very sneaky and slippery, and they get past your defenses. And if that happens, then there's going to be hell to pay for sure. And so, and I am leaving out a whole lot of this Twilight Zone stuff because it's all, there's literally over 1,000 videos on my channel. You guys have heard a lot of it already, so there's no point in going through it piece by piece, I guess. I want to kind of focus a little bit more on the stuff that we haven't talked too much about, although a lot of it I'm kind of hesitant to get into, because my plan was that I thought I'm going to go out to Northern California and grow, $500,000 worth of weed in a single season. And then I will use that money to fund the band. And I had the money from my girlfriend's family, to buy the property and to buy the dirt. And it's actually really expensive to grow pot. A lot of people think you just go and put some plants in the ground, and that's not how it works. You buy these giant swimming pool-sized bags. Usually they're like grow bags. Because they aerate the roots better than just putting them in a hole. And they're like 1,000 gallons, So you have 1,000 gallons of soil, and then you have to treat all that soil with expensive amendments, and then, and then all the fertilizer for these massive plants, and they can take up to 100 gallons a day of water. When they get, if you're trying to grow a bunch of 10-pound monsters, 100 of them, you're using an incredible amount of water, and, it's really just a lot more insane than you would imagine. I've seen people have to set up scaffolding and get chainsaws to go out and harvest their plants at the end of the year. Some of the bigger growers in NorCal. So I fired the band and just thought, well, whatever, I'm the star of the show, so I'll just go out to California and just do it again. You know, I got this magical ability to just draw whatever I need to me, so whatever. And that was still true, but there's something I think that I understand now that I didn't understand then. This whole thing with the law of attraction and manifestation is mostly a new agey marketing gimmick to drain naive people of their money. But it's not totally bunk either. There is some truth to it. There's a lot of truth to it. But I think it takes a lot of time to build up the charge and to have everything organized. It's not something that just happens overnight, you know. So eventually I kind of got depressed because I realized what I had done, you know, that I had built up all these expectations leading up to 2012. And the expectation that was created basically by Terrence McKenna, that we would reach some sort of optimal level of manifesting potential in 2012. You know, I had kind of subconsciously organized everything to sort of culminate then. But then right there at the finish line, I blew it. And so that charge that I had been building for 15 years or whatever just dissipated into nothingness, which was, of course, a horrific lesson to learn. But I set about my task of going out, and we bought a property in Lake County because Mendocino County turned out to be too expensive. And, you know, I had seen evidence of this already in the past, and I had an idea of what was happening up there, but it wasn't really totally clear to me. I thought that obviously a bunch of people like me that were forward-thinking, kind of progressive, you know, higher consciousness-seeking people, anarchists that want to be free, are the people that are going to go out to Northern California and grow giant pot plants and try to liberate themselves from the matrix, and then use that liberation to liberate others, right? By the way, speaking of liberating people, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron or supporting us via any one of the options in the chat. We're demonetized, so without support from the audience, I get nothing. So we really do appreciate it. And so that's not true. Market, so you have a hostility of the people that have lived there for generations, and they're hard. You know, there was a documentary called Murder Mountain on Netflix for a while, and I knew a lot of those people. If you have a chance to watch that, it'll give you an idea of how insane it was. You know, it was extremely dangerous, and there were horror stories that the algorithm would not tolerate me talking about them. And we had also vigilante justice, which actually worked pretty well. Like Laytonville did not have a police department. You know, we regulated ourselves. So in one case, just to give you an example, there was a guy that SA'd somebody's 4-year-old, and the parents and a couple of other people, I don't know who they were, got together and got this guy and took him down in the basement and tied him to a chair and poured a vial of LSD down his throat and then tortured him to death over the period of about 10 days. So, you know, once word of that sort of thing got out, that's not going to really happen anymore. Every PE, you know, C3DO in the area is gone when, you know, I mean, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. So it's an interesting side note that it kind of seemed to me like vigilante justice maybe works better than cops, you know, and the same kind of attitude people had towards like robbers. If somebody came to top your plants is what it's called, because the thieves would cut the tops of the plants off and then put them in burlap sacks, roll them up and be gone. You know, they wouldn't harvest everything. They would just top the plants. But if somebody saw you doing that, I mean, you could be in the middle of a conversation with somebody and be like, hold on, look out the window, take out a trespasser, and then just keep talking like nothing happened. Because there were giant pigs all over Humboldt and Mendocino County that would come and eat the trespasser, and then you just throw some lye down, and if there's any other remains, and it's just gone. So it was wild. I mean, oh. Did it drop the stream or not? I can't tell what's going on. Okay, looks like we're all right. Sorry about that, guys. It's a rainy season here in the Amazon. I think we're just having some issue with the, so, that wasn't all there was to it. There were a lot of beautiful, cool people there. It was a beautiful place. The beaches were incredible. There were secret roads that once I got to know people, we would go out to these beaches with like flatbeds and generators, and my band would play. I did get another band going eventually, on the Humboldt County beach on the 4th of July, and there would be pot growers just blowing up $500,000 because who cares? And the money these people had was incredible. You could have people with an IQ of like 45, that barely could read because their parents taught them to grow pot. Their parents taught them to grow pot. That's all they knew how to do. They didn't care. Why would they read a book? Why would they go to school? Why would they do anything? No one had a job in like 3 or 4 generations. No one, they weren't educated. Didn't matter. I literally watched a guy dig up $500,000 one time, and it was moldy. He literally did not give a fuck at all. Like, he just dug up another $500,000 that wasn't moldy. He didn't even care. Didn't flinch. It was like nothing. Crazy too to think about how much money is in the hills of Northern California because people go to prison and get killed and stuff, and they've buried money all over for decades, and then they're just dead. And the hills are just, there's money everywhere. But you can't just go out and look for it because there's guerrilla growers that'll shoot you on sight. There are fish hooks hung from the trees so that right at eye level. So if you're walking around out there, it'll catch you right in the eye, and worse things than that. So wild place. And I ended up in the worst part of it. I really didn't know what I was getting into. Lake County, California is an abyss. It is a pustule on the ass of Satan. Talking about like 5th and 6th generation tweakers. I picked up a woman hitchhiking one time, started talking about how some guy had picked her up hitchhiking, and she ended up like duct taping him to a chair, tying him up at gunpoint and robbing him and all this stuff. And I'm like, I just picked this woman up hitchhiking, she's talking about like rolling a bowl with her grandma when she's like 7 years old or whatever, which is, in case you're not familiar with the vernacular, it's smoking meth, rolling a bowl. So, and they were bad, the tweakers were so bad that we actually, created a petition and delivered it to the police station trying to get them to make a Tweaker Tuesday so we could have a hunting tag to go around and hunt tweakers because, you can't retrieve a person from that after a certain point, after, a certain line, they say like only 1% or something recover. 1%. So, and they become sexually deviant and dangerous, and they're stealing all the time. I saw a guy in Lake County in the grocery store one time trying to get a box of cereal off the shelf, and he's like just flopping so bad from the tweak that he like can't get a box of cereal. He's like throwing them behind himself and just, and it's so normal, they don't even throw him out. They're just waiting for him to finally latch onto a box of cereal. So I guess I skipped the part about how before I left Colorado, I ended up marrying the doctor's daughter. And so we'll go back to that for a second. We went up into Silverton, which is like 10,000 feet high in the Rocky Mountains. And we... I don't know if we rented the park. I don't know what was going on there, but we were supposed to have Golden Light Eagle come and perform the wedding ceremony. And for those of you that haven't seen all this stuff, Golden Light Eagle was a Sioux Sundance chief who had this weird meeting, I guess, I don't know what else to call it, gathering at a hotel in Farmington where he explained to all of us about the 1111 frequencies and the star tribes, which he claimed a lot of different indigenous groups and ancient peoples had been into contact with forever and ever and ever. And so he was going to do the wedding, but he didn't show up when he was supposed to, so I called him, and he's like, oh, there's been a death in the family. And I was livid because I was like, why didn't he call and tell me this or something? But then later on, I found out that it was actually his son that had died, and that's why he just didn't even think to call us. So here we are on our wedding day with no Golden Light Eagle. And we're like, well, what do we do? And it turned out that one of the doctor's friends, which blows my mind because she was so normal and like, I mean, I don't know how they were friends, but this woman was a Luciferian priestess, and she was actually, I guess, licensed to officiate weddings in Colorado. So she's like, well, I can do it. And I was like, well, what is your, tradition or whatever? And she's like, Luciferian. And I was like, oh, it's actually maybe a little better than Golden Light Eagle even. So we went back into the peaks, like way up high. So we were above tree line, and there's just like big jagged rocky peaks, and behind us was this these tailings from this mine that were full of fluorite crystals, and I used to go climb up in them and pick all these green and purple fluorite crystals out of the tailings all the time. And so I knew we were surrounded by gyms everywhere. And, there were like washes across the road, and you could pick like these gym quality terminated quartz crystals out of the streams and stuff that had been washed out of the hills. And, Colorado quartz is way higher quality than Arkansas. But at any rate, so we're like way up in the peaks, and this woman casts a circle and like invokes the dragon. And there's all these yuppies, because it's like this doctor family, and her dad was a computer programmer, so they're like all these normie muggles like in chairs way out in the middle of nowhere at the top of these peaks with this Luciferian priestess casting a circle and invoking dragons and shit. It was great, man. I just couldn't believe how the universe worked out that circumstance, because I do downplay it a lot. I have to admit that, because people get the wrong idea, but the Lucifer myth has been a very, very important element of all of this for me, and I probably should talk more about it and just not care what people think, but we have this thing to know, to will, to dare, and to be silent, and I'm probably not silent enough. But so I married the girl, and that's how we did it. And I'm sorry that I went back in the story, but so then we went to California, scouted it out, found the house, started growing. And it was a nightmare. It was pretty much a nightmare. We were right on the highway, and I didn't want the house at all. But we went in, and it had like huge vaulted ceilings and a pool, and the girl starts screaming, and the realtor's like, "Oh my God, I know this is it." And I'm going like, "No, man, there's nowhere for this full sun. I'm right on the highway. We're gonna get killed. Like you can't just put where are we gonna put the pot, So I'm like, man, this isn't really good. So I realized we have this huge hill that is actually facing in the right direction to put all the pot on, but I don't have the money to, I've already bought all this dirt and the house and all this stuff. So, I'm kind of running out of money, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? So I go up to these gangsters. They acted like gangsters. Wait till you hear how pussy these guys were, though. They were like, some of them were like giant black dudes with like tattoos, and they seemed hella gangster chains, and the leader was like this really like, huge muscles, but he was a little white dude, but he seemed hella gangster, and they were all from Chicago, which is like, the murder capital of the world at the time. So I thought they were G's at first, until there was trouble and I had to handle it. They all were terrified. But where are we at in this? So I go up to his house, and I'm like, do you want to do like a 50-50 split or whatever? He might have actually approached me. Yeah, actually, that's what happened. He was driving up, and he's like, hey, new neighbor, come down here. And he's like, do you want to put 100 pot plants on this hill right here, and I'll pay for it, and we'll split it at the end of the year. And I'm like, well, how do you want to do the split? And he's like, I'll point at one, and then you point at one, and I'll point at one. And so at first I said, yes, I should have done it. But I was really paranoid too, because I'm coming from Virginia, in the county that had the highest police to civilian ratio of anywhere in the United States, right? So like total police state. So this like California mentality of just like, yeah, sure, let's just put 1,000 pounds of weed on the hill in front of my house, like no problem, And the thing is, what you don't realize until you go on Google Maps is that it's like 3 counties that are the size of, France or something together, and it's just pot. And right down the street from me, there was a guy that was growing 10,000 plants. Like, I'm not kidding you, 30,000 actually, 30,000. This old hippie dude, and eventually they busted him because he rerouted a river, because each one of those plants at peak season is taking 100 gallons of water a day. And he rerouted a river and drained it dry. This dude's supposed to be a hippie, that's not very hippie. Like, what did he need 30,000 pot plants for? And he had expanded his garden so you could see it from Highway 101, I mean, it was like, and his position was that he technically had paperwork for all those plants. But, the feds didn't see it that way. And eventually he did end up going to prison for like 14 years. When he put those 30,000 plants in, they were like, that's enough of that. And they actually came and got him. So I didn't end up going with the neighbor because I didn't trust him. And I didn't want to go that big, and it was just right on the highway, and I was nervous. So I ended up putting the plants in this really bad spot. There was this giant tree that I cut down. I really wish I hadn't done that. It was really old and gigantic, and it almost killed me. I didn't know what I was doing. It's insane that I did that. And so one day I'm out pushing my wheelbarrow around the house to the garden to put dirt in the big bags. And this giant redneck pulls up in a truck in front of the house with this old man. And this guy jumps out and he starts yelling at me like, hey, like, why did you, every year you come and steal my dad's pot plants? And I'm like, looking around, what do you mean every year? I've only been here a couple of months. So eventually I convinced them that there's no way that I could have stolen the pot plants. And then I get rid of them and I go back to work and I go up on my deck and I look out and I see a cop like roll and then roll back and come up in my driveway. And he's like, yeah, well, I noticed you had some pot plants on your deck. And I'm like, in your rearview mirror from down there on the road? Like, you just saw that? Like, what? And he's like, well, no, actually these guys called and said you stole their weed. And I was like, you're really here because of like someone called the police because you're like looking into this. So I was like, that's awesome, So I had almost 60 pot plants on the other side of that fence. I was legal for 12. So he's like, well, can I come look? And I'm like, yeah. So I bring the cop into the house and we go up on the deck, and for some reason, like, I had been taking the plants and putting them in the garden all day, right? And there's this huge, like, 16-foot fence around this area, right? Like right behind this cop. And I had exactly 12 plants, and I gave him my paperwork and he counted the plants and he left. And so that was a pretty remarkable experience. And so, it's basically just exactly what you would imagine, growing a bunch of weed on the side of the highway in one of the most dangerous places in the United States. It was the dumbest goddamn thing. I went and got all these pitbulls. I was nice to them. I didn't treat them like guard dogs or anything. They were great dogs. One of them I already had. I got another giant one. And I would sleep in the garden with these pitbulls, like, chained to my cot or in the cot with me, like sleeping on me. With like a machete and a baseball bat, because I was already a felon. I couldn't have a gun. So, and you can't have guns and weed really. So I just had a machete and a baseball bat, and I'm like sleeping in this giant pot garden with these pit bulls. And mostly nothing happened, but one night I was out on the deck and I saw this car like pull up and kind of stop and drive backwards, and he's obviously casing the place, right? So remember those gangster ass neighbors that I told you about that are up on the hill, like these giant black dudes and the big, but muscle bound but little white guy. I go up there and I'm like, yo, we got a problem, man. We got to go down and handle this shit right now. And they're like, what? What do you mean? Eyes all big and stuff, and they're all like panicked. And I'm like looking at them and I'm going like, you guys aren't serious right now. Like, I just assume you guys have got like guns everywhere in this house. Like, they're like, yeah, we got guns, but, and I'm like, well, get your guns and let's go down to the highway. We have a problem, And they're like, oh man, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I'm just like put your finger on the trigger of your shotgun and follow me, you know? So I go down to the highway, and I've got a machete in my hand. And I walk out to the highway, and I have this trail of like these thug-looking dudes behind me, all of them strapped. And that car takes off, and this cop pulls up. And here I am with a machete in my hand, like walking down the highway and at harvest time in Lake County. And the cop is like, "Did you see a red Mazda, blah, blah, blah?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think he was about to rob us." And he's like, "He sure was. People called in." And he took off, like no problem that I'm like walking down the street with a machete in my hand, and I've got a bunch of armed thugs with me. Like, that's not even an issue. So long story short, I more or less survived the season, but at the very end, when I was about to cuddle my plants and call it a success, and I had met this guy, Raz Kennedy, who was a vocal coach for Green Day, Rancid, and Metallica at the time. Like, I would be walking into his office as James Hetfield was walking out. And I only got in there because I went to see his girlfriend, who was a vocal coach. And I saw her performing with Big Brother in the Holding Company at Bob Weir's Club, the Sweetwater, in San Rafael. And she was singing Janis Joplin's parts with her original band of like old men, and she killed it, So after the show, I asked her if she'd coached, and she said she did. Another interesting thing is that I had noticed this weird connection between the Mysteries and the Masons and stuff, and the Grateful Dead and that whole scene. And right above Weir's Club was a Masonic temple, and that event actually was a wake for Augustus Owsley Stanley III, who was the guy that made all the LSD and the Wall of Sound, the Grateful Dead's giant sound system and all that. It was like a wake for Owsley, and they actually hosted it in the Masonic temple. So we were going up, and there's all these Masons coming down the stairs in suits and stuff, and we go up in there, and there's like day glow, they're trying to make it look like it would have back in the 60s, and it was really wild. We did this like tribute party to Owsley in the Masonic temple, inside the Masonic temple. But anyways, so I went to see her, and I walked in, and there was a picture of her with Bob Weir with his arm around her on the piano. And I was like, damn. So she says, "You need to go see my ex-boyfriend, Raz Kennedy." And she gives me his phone number, so I call him, and I schedule to go meet him. And I have no idea that he's like this hotshot vocal coach that works with Metallica and all these crazy big acts. And he's got writing credits with like Rancid and stuff. And I started working with him for a while. And eventually, because I was terrible, he like dropped his sunglasses down to the end of his nose, and he's like, "What label are you on?" And I was like, "I'm not on a label." And he's like, "Well, where are your recordings or whatever?" And I was like, "I'm not recording anything." And he's like, "How did you get in here?" And so he generally only works with people that have a major label contract, and you get hooked up with him through their A&R guy. And I was like, "Your ex-girlfriend gave me your phone number?" And he's like, "Damn, man, you're lucky you have potential, because technically you shouldn't even be here." But he decided that I did, and he offered to write with me, which was a major thing. Like, this guy's got all kinds of crazy connections, and if he writes, then he has, an interest in the material. So it was a big deal. But I needed money to fund all of this and to pay musicians and stuff, because I fired my band, right? So that was my plan, basically. Like, I'm going to cut this weed down, and then I'm going to, write with Raz and then record something. But I'll have the money to pay for the studio and everything, because I will have harvested all this weed. So about a week before harvest, a windstorm rolls through Lake County. It blew over tractor trailers, like buildings were, it might as well have been a tornado. Like, the town of Nice, which, if it had been wiped off the face of the earth, no one would have really batted an eye. It's a wretched, this place is basically like a gigantic pile of dilaudid OxyContin and methamphetamine. Probably some heroin and fentanyl sprinkled in the mix now, But yeah, it destroyed everything, including my pot garden. My entire garden was exposed to the highway because the fences were totally blown over, like flattened to the ground, like all around. So I had to go out the next day, and like some of the plants lived actually, even if they were ripped out and like thrown across the yard, they would still, I put them back in, but they didn't grow anymore. Like the buds, actually a lot of the weight comes in at the end, and they didn't really swell up like they were supposed to. A lot of them didn't finish, so they weren't very sellable. It fucking wrecked me because I had to pay the loans back. And then after I paid the loans back, I split up with a girl, and her family sold that house at a $400,000 profit and didn't give me a penny, which was amazing, right? So this is about where I'm going to leave the story, because basically what happened is I ended up driving away with about $20,000 in a beat-up old van with nowhere to go, and there's another pretty significant detail that I left out. Remember how when I was in my early 20s, I got really sick? You know, if you guys have been following the story, you know that. And I developed a dependence on opioids, right? Well, when I ripped the end of my finger off and I couldn't play guitar anymore, guess what happened? Started taking opioids again. In fact, because this girl was a doctor's daughter and the doctor did not give a flying fuck about her, you know, one time she was yelling at her mom, like, you never listen to me, and her phone rang, and her mom put her finger in her face, like, shh, I gotta answer the phone. I mean, it was bad, man. But she had an injury from kayaking. She almost died. And so her mom, just to shut her up, like, gave her all this Dilaudid, and, like, she just had all these, you know, huge jars full of all these pills from her mom and her friends that they had prescribed them. So all of a sudden, you know, I had this injury that started it, and I had access to the pills again. So in order to single-handedly growing 100 pounds of marijuana is a lot harder than you would have. I mean, it's supposed to take a crew. You have 3 or 4 guys to do it. You don't just do it yourself, you know. And I was on a hill. So, and I didn't have automated watering either. I was lugging the water, you know, 100 gallons per plant a day or whatever up the hill, each plant, and having to pour it and wait, pour it and wait, pour it and wait, pour it and wait. There were rattlesnakes everywhere. Lake County is full of rattlesnakes. There were holes all over the yard. My dog got bit on the face, and I didn't even know, but he was like this, and then he looked at me, and the side of his face was like huge, and there were 2 holes, and there was blood dripping out. He almost died. Luckily, I was on the payroll of a doctor basically, and she paid for the antivenin and everything. But yeah, so I left there realizing that I had become dependent upon opioids again. So everything just suddenly crashed and burned, and that windstorm, you know, at the end just... So that's where I'm going to stop, because that seems like an excellent cliffhanger. I hope you guys are digging the Outlaw tales so far. It just stays crazy like this too, you know. And I was thinking about this today. I mean, I guess I have to continue this up to the present day in Ecuador, and you know, it hasn't necessarily been easy. But I don't know if I ever heard anybody having this much stuff going on in a single lifetime. It's just, it really, like, it's not lost on me that how insane that is, you know. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably much more valuable than living a normal, stable life and, you know, having savings and whatnot. Some days I don't feel that way, but overall, I think, you know, there's probably a treasure that I've accumulated by living on the edge like this all these years. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and drop the Outlaw tales for tonight. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please consider becoming a patron or supporting the channel in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise all these hours that I put in are uncompensated, and I hate that. So please do find it in your heart to pay me, and I'll see you guys again probably tomorrow.